My parents boarded their flight. My mother slid a few crumpled bills across the table like she was tipping a waiter and said, "This should last you," without even looking me in the eye. They were smiling, excited, passports in hand, talking about Europe like it was a reward they'd earned. And maybe it was, but I stood there realizing they'd planned every detail of their luxury trip and none of mine. No groceries stocked. No bills paid ahead. Just spare change and a locked door behind them. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I nodded, smiled back, and waved as their taxi disappeared down the street. That silence, that was the moment I decided to stop asking for anything. The first week was rough. I rationed food. I walked instead of taking the bus. I ignored the growing panic every time I checked my phone and saw their photos, wine glasses clinking, hotel balconies, captions about finally living. They never asked if I was okay. Not once. When I texted that I was running low, my father replied with a thumbs up emoji and said, "You'll figure it out." So I did. I figured out how to stretch money, how to cook with almost nothing, how to work late hours at a cafe I'd applied to months earlier, but never took seriously because my parents said I should focus on school. I figured out how capable I was when no one was there to rescue me. And I figured out something else too, how invisible I'd been in my own house. Every night after my shift, exhausted and smelling like coffee grounds, I opened the same old folder on my laptop. Inside were spreadsheets, receipts, scanned documents, things I'd quietly kept over the years. I wasn't snooping. I'd just been the kid they handed paperwork to. Sort this. File that. You're good with computers. I was? Very good. Patterns started to show up once I had time to really look. Missed payments that didn't make sense. Accounts I didn't recognize. A property tax notice marked "Final warning" that had somehow been buried under travel brochures. While they were touring museums, I was discovering the truth. Their perfect lifestyle was balanced on a knife's edge. I didn't confront them. I didn't warn them. I kept working, saving every extra rupee, every tip, every late night bonus. I paid for my own food, my own phone bill. I even covered one utility when the notice came addressed to occupant instead of their names. Not because I wanted to help them, but because I wanted options. By the time they came back, suntanned and loud, dragging suitcases through the door, I was calm. Too calm. My mother frowned at the empty fridge. My father complained about the internet being slow. Then the mail caught his eye. A thick stack. Red stamps. Official envelopes. "What is all this?" he asked, annoyed. I shrugged. Mail. They opened it together. I watched their faces change. Confusion first. Then fear. Then the kind of quiet that swallows a room whole. "What do you mean past due?" My mother whispered. My father started pacing. "This can't be right. We paid, didn't we?" I sat down. Slowly. Finally. "I checked," I said. "You didn't." For a long time, they turned to me like they were seeing me for the first time. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I just told them what I knew. How close they were to losing the property they bragged about. How the accounts they thought were handled were hanging by threads. How leaving me with spare change had forced me to grow up faster than either of them ever had. "You should have told us," my mother said weakly. I met her eyes. You didn't ask. That hurt them more than any shout could have. Then I stood and placed an envelope on the table. Inside was a bank statement. My name on it, a balance that made them blink twice. I'm moving out, I said. I already signed the lease. My father's voice cracked. After everything we've done for you. I smiled, not cruelly, just clearly. This is what I did for myself. With what you left me. They didn't stop me. They couldn't. Because in that moment, they understood the shock wasn't the money, or the papers, or the risk they were in. It was realizing the child they'd underestimated had quietly become the most prepared person in the room, and no longer needed them at all. They tried to talk after that. Long speeches, nervous jokes, sudden concern, but something had shifted, and they could feel it slipping through their fingers. That night, I packed without rushing. Every item I folded felt lighter than the last. My mother hovered in the doorway, asking questions she'd never asked before. Where would I eat? How would I manage? Did I have enough money? I almost laughed. I remembered the crumpled bills on the table. The way she hadn't waited for an answer. I'll figure it out, I said, using my father's words, letting them land exactly where they belonged. The next morning, I left early. No dramatic goodbye. No slammed doors. Just my keys on the counter and a quiet click behind me. For the first time in my life, the silence didn't hurt. Weeks passed. Then months. I built a routine that belonged only to me. Work, classes, late dinners I paid for myself. I slept better. I breathed easier. I stopped flinching every time my phone buzzed. They called more often than they ever had before. At first, I didn't answer. Not out of spite, out of clarity. I needed them to sit with the consequences of what they'd done, the same way I had. When I finally did pick up, my father sounded older. Smaller. We're struggling, he admitted. We didn't realize how much you handled. I leaned back in my chair and looked around my tiny apartment, the second-hand couch, the chipped mug, the freedom in every corner. I realized, I said, they asked for help, not directly, carefully, pride wrapped in politeness. I didn't say no. I sent them a list instead, a budget, payment schedules, clear boundaries, no guilt, no emotional bargaining, just structure. The same structure I'd built for myself when they were sipping wine overseas. This is how I can help, I told them. If you want it. They followed it. Because this time, they had no choice. The real revenge wasn't watching them panic or stumble. It wasn't the shock on their faces when they understood how close they'd come to losing everything. It was this, standing steady while they learned, for the first time, what it felt like to depend on someone who had once depended on them. They left me with spare change and taught me a lesson they never intended to teach. And when they finally understood what they'd done, it was already too late. I had changed, and I wasn't going back. A year later, they invited me to dinner. Same house, same table, different energy. My mother cooked too much food, like she was trying to make up for all the empty days at once. My father kept checking his phone, nervous, like numbers might jump out and attack him. They'd followed my plan. Downsized. Sold things they didn't need. Canceled trips they used to brag about. For the first time, their life looked real. Halfway through the meal, my father cleared his throat. We were wrong, he said. No speeches this time. No excuses. Just the truth, sitting there between us. My mother's eyes filled. "We thought providing meant money," she said quietly. "We didn't realize how little we were actually giving you." I listened. I didn't rush to comfort them. I didn't interrupt. I let them feel it. Because growth only sticks when it's uncomfortable. When dinner ended, my mother slid an envelope toward me, the same way she once slid that spare change. Her hands were shaking. Inside was a check. Not huge. Not dramatic. Just fair. "For everything you covered," she said. "And for what we didn't." I pushed it back. "I don't need it," I said, and I meant it. "Keep it. You'll need it more than I will." They stared at me, stunned. That was the final shock. Not that I survived without them. Not that I figured things out. But that I no longer needed repayment, approval, or permission. I stood up, hugged them, briefly, honestly, and walked out into the night. They watched from the doorway as I left, finally understanding the cost of underestimating someone who learns to stand alone. They traveled the world and left me with spare change. I stayed behind and built a life they never saw coming. Years passed quietly after that. The way real lives do when no one is watching. My parents didn't fall apart, but they never went back to who they were either. The loud confidence was gone. The careless spending. The assumption that I would always be there, filling gaps they didn't want to see. Sometimes my mother would call just to ask what I was cooking. Sometimes my father would ask my opinion before making a decision, then pause like he was surprised he'd done that. I answered when I wanted. I helped when it didn't cost me peace. And that was the part that still shocked them. One evening, my father visited my apartment for the first time. He stood in the doorway longer than necessary. Looking around like he was trying to spot the moment, he lost control of the story. "You built all this alone," he said. I didn't correct him, because alone didn't mean abandoned anymore. It meant capable. He sat down and lowered his voice. "With thought giving you freedom meant leaving you to fend for yourself." I met his eyes. "Freedom isn't absence," I said. "It's support without control." He nodded slowly, like a man learning a language too late to speak it fluently, but late was still better than never. When he left, he hugged me tighter than usual. Not owning, not claiming. Just acknowledging. That night, I realized something important. The revenge wasn't about proving them wrong. It wasn't about money. It wasn't even about independence. It was about breaking a pattern. They left me with spare change, expecting me to shrink. Instead, I expanded, quietly, patiently, without asking permission. And the shock they felt wasn't anger or fear anymore. It was respect. The kind that comes when someone you underestimated walks past you. Calm, steady, and already gone. The last time it really hit them was at a family gathering. Relatives crowded the living room, talking over each other, laughing too loudly. Someone asked my parents how I was doing, the way people always do, casually, like the answer doesn't matter. My father didn't look at me when he replied. "They're doing well," he said. "Better than we ever did at that age." There was pride in his voice, but also something else. Regret. Awareness. The kind that never fully goes away. Later, when everyone was distracted, my mother pulled me aside. Her voice was low. When we left, she said, we thought you'd call. We thought you'd need us. I held her gaze. I did need you. She swallowed hard. But needing someone. I continued, and depending on them blindly, those are two different things. She nodded, tears forming. Because she finally understood the difference. I didn't stay long. I never stayed long anymore. As I walked to my car, I thought about that younger version of myself. The one standing in the kitchen with spare change in their hand. Trying not to cry. Trying not to feel small. If I could speak to them now, I wouldn't tell them to be patient or strong. I'd tell them this. One day, the people who walked away will be shocked, not because you failed without them, but because you succeeded without ever asking them back. My parents traveled abroad and left me with almost nothing. What they found when they returned wasn't anger. Wasn't revenge in the way they expected. It was a version of me they could no longer control, and a silence that finally belonged to me. The silence stayed with them after that. Not the awkward kind, but the heavy, thoughtful kind that makes people replay old moments they wish they could redo. My mother started sending messages she never used to send. Did you eat? Are you resting enough? Small questions. Late questions. Questions that came after the damage was already done. I replied when I felt like it. Kindly. Briefly. On my terms. My father stopped giving advice. That was the biggest change. When he spoke now, it was careful, like he knew his words no longer carried authority. Only wait, if I chose to give them some. One afternoon, months later, he asked if we could walk together. Just around the block. Nothing formal. Halfway down the street, he stopped and said, "When we left you that money, I told myself hardship would make you stronger." I waited. "But I see now," he continued, voice tight. "We didn't test your strength. We tested your loneliness." I nodded. "And I passed," I said softly. He looked away. Because that was the part he couldn't fix. We reached the corner, and he hesitated. "Do you still need us?" he asked. I thought about it carefully. Then I answered honestly. "I need you differently now." That was the final adjustment they had to make. They didn't lose a child. They lost control. And that loss changed everything. Now, when they talk about that trip, the photos, the memories, they leave one detail out. They never mention what it cost them. They never mention the moment. They came home expecting the same dependent version of me, and found someone who had quietly outgrown them. They still travel sometimes. Smaller trips. Planned better. With budgets and backup plans. With questions asked in advance. They learned. But I was already gone by then, building, choosing, living. They left me with spare change. I turned it into independence, boundaries, and a life that didn't need permission. And that realization, that quiet, irreversible shift, is the shock they'll carry longer than any souvenir they brought back. The truth is, they never apologized the way movies show it. No dramatic breakdown. No perfect words. Instead, they changed their behavior, and for them, that was harder. They stopped assuming, stopped deciding for me, stopped treating my presence like a convenience. And every time they hesitated before asking something of me, every time they checked instead of commanded, I knew the lesson had settled deep. One night, my mother admitted something she'd never said out loud. When you didn't call while we were gone, she whispered. I told myself you were being stubborn. But really, I was afraid you didn't need us anymore. I didn't rush to deny it. Because part of that fear was true. Needing someone should never come from neglect. Love shouldn't be discovered through absence. And the version of me they created by leaving me behind, they could never undo that. I still show up for them. I still care. But I do it freely, not because I'm trapped, not because I'm afraid, not because I owe them survival. That's the difference they feel every time they look at me now. They went abroad thinking they were investing in memories. They came back to consequences. They left me with spare change, assuming I'd wait, struggle, or beg. Instead, I learned restraint. I learned patience. I learned how powerful silence can be when it's paired with action. And the biggest shock of all, I didn't ruin them. I didn't embarrass them. I didn't walk away angry. I simply became untouchable. And that, quiet, steady, irreversible, is the kind of revenge that lasts.